This discussion here and now, though, has far more to do with NFL season win totals and your futures angles than does anything draft related, just between you and me. It's our friend from Sharp Football, sharpfootballstats.com, Sharp Football Analysis, the great Warren Sharp. Hello, Warren.
Hey, good afternoon, Gil.
Thanks for being here, man. I appreciate it. Listen, before we even get into the way that we'll get into the top 5 teams in terms of your strength of schedule, the bottom 5 in terms of who's got the hardest and the easiest coming up, both from an offensive and defensive standpoint. But, I said a couple segments ago, we have been inundated by the mainstream media for all these years by, this is the team with the best strength of schedule, the hardest strength of schedule, and the easiest. And it's all based on winning percentage from last year, which is just so lazy. And is that really the impetus, that alone, where it just drives you so crazy that we accept this year after year? It's 2017, for God's sakes, and the analytics revolution has already begun. It's already in full bore, that we still accept that uniformly on mainstream media.
Yeah, it's extremely lazy. I think the real reason why they do it, like you said, it was established at one point in time before there were a lot of analytics that were accessible. And then it's just been carried forward because it's something that the schedule is basically set the moment that final Week 17 game ends. The reality is a lot of people don't understand what changes from that Week 17 game once that final Week 17 game ends and what they're able to do for, the very next minute in terms of project the opponents that they're going to face. It only decides 2 opponents. The other 14 opponents are on a cycling basis and have been in existence for years and will be, predetermined down in the future as well. So, that it only matters based upon where you finish in the division, and then that tells you where you're going to, in terms of who you're going to play in 2 of the other divisions in your conference. So if the Patriots, that would determine maybe who they would play in the AFC South and the AFC West, and maybe they're going to play every single team in the AFC North, and they play their division, and then they play a division from the NFC. All that is predetermined. So it allows people to start talking about it as soon as the season is over, and then obviously have these schedule of release shows where they instantly start flashing up all these graphics packages with who has the easiest or hardest strength of schedule based on prior year win percentage. Now, you and I both know that wins and losses in the NFL don't determine who is a better team. You could have any amount of luck go your way, which is why there's edges in season win totals and forecasting them, because people think a team is what they were last year to some extent, how many games they won or lost. And the reality is that just matters for playoff seeding. A team's the best ways to measure them is via analytics in terms of how efficient was this offense, schedule related, adjust for schedule, how efficient were they against a neutral opponent. And that's how you can get a good understanding. And these things actually correlate, and you can run regression analysis from one year to the next. And it actually lines up a lot more favorably to being more consistent than a lot of people probably think from one year to the next.
And you do it versus pass defense versus rush defense, also offensively, rush offense, pass offense. You also do pass protection metrics. What else is in there into the blend, as you call it, Warren?
Yeah, exactly. So I have a passing efficiency blend, and that basically takes into account the efficiency of your passing offense, the efficiency of in terms of yards per pass attempt, and then it looks at explosiveness, because a lot of people don't understand how important explosive plays are to wins and losses, and I think it's going to be something that will be more factored in as we move forward into the future. Explosiveness is very important. Then you have pass protection. From a passing perspective, passing efficiency is 4 times more correlated to winning games than is rushing efficiency. So being able to protect your quarterback, extremely important. So you look at those 4 metrics from a passing blend. You look at the rushing blend, which contains rushing efficiency, explosive rushing, then target on occasion those running backs out of the backfield, which is another metric that should be getting more focus moving forward, because it does really help the efficiency of an overall football team. And then there's tons of other ways you can look at strength of schedule that I have at Sharp Football Stats. I mean, you can look at how good are the third down defenses that a team's going to face, how good are the red zone defenses. So there's a lot of other things that you can look at the website. But the key ones are obviously passing and rushing, and then you've got your blends for each category.
And of course, you pioneered early down statistics as well, something that, again, never gets talked about on any preview show that one might see on NBC or CBS or ABC or whatever network it is that you're watching on a Sunday. Not only early down stuff. When it comes, and we'll conclude the actual basis and the metric talk with this before we get into the actual teams, but when it comes to the explosive plays, Warren, because I think this is so interesting, and we tend to, the way that our brains are wired when we're watching a football game, we just sort of, the play happens, an explosive play happens, and we don't really compartmentalize it necessarily as such when we think about the game. It just is what it is. They scored 7 points or they had a big gain or whatever it is. But when you view explosive plays, are you viewing it as something that correlates to future performance, or are you viewing it as something that is unsustainable and therefore something that is either an overperformance or underperformance, if you will, sort of like the runners in scoring position of baseball, or 3-point percentage in basketball, something that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen a second time?
No, I more side with the former. There's two P's that are involved with this. It's personnel and play calling. And you can have a strategic desire to attack deeper down the field and to try to call plays that obtain better, gains. And then, of course, you have to have the personnel to execute it. We saw in New England when Rob Gronkowski went out, he was actually their biggest deep threat last season before his injury. They hadn't yet worked in Chris Hogan. But fortunately, from the Bills, they stole Chris Hogan in the offseason, and that offense became one of the more explosive passing offenses last season in the NFL. And I like to look at it on a rate basis. I don't look at it as a volume statistic. So I like to look at percentage of total passes, which are explosive. And of course, through the statistics at Sharp Football Stats, the user themselves can go there and filter out things like, I don't want to include third downs because I know teams might be desperate, so they'll be throwing the ball deeper on third down. I don't want to factor in fourth quarter because I know a team might be trailing, or if they're up, they're not going to be trying to dial up a lot of things. I want to get a better feel for what this team typically would do in the first half on first or second down that are, basically the play caller's desires as opposed to reacting situationally to where they find themselves, and see what the aggressive natures and tendencies are of this particular team. But how this factors into performance and efficiency is that when you can be explosive, consider the fact that you may not have to gain 2 or 3 or 4 first downs to move the chains. You might bypass multiple third down attempts just with one big play. And that is massive in terms of efficiency in the NFL. And that's why I love early down success rate. It is looking at bypassing third down. Explosive plays bypasses multiple third downs. And the reality is, yes, I look at explosive rushing, but that is the one where it's a little bit harder to sustain. Right. That's really more so on your offensive line and the matchup that you have, as well as, your running back's abilities. But because it's difficult, you've got all 11 defenders that you're ultimately going to have to, in one way or another, try to get past for most of the chances of explosive play on the ground. In the air, that's where a higher rate of, ability to sustain that down the road, it comes into play, because it's about the quarterback, it's his protection, and it's the strategy that the offense employs. It's easier to hit an explosive pass play than it is to gain an explosive rush play.
Well, it has to do everything with the play calling, the tendencies of play calling, as you point out, and that is what is so unique to football that doesn't exist in the other examples that I gave formerly. Warren Sharp, those are the angles upon which he bases strength of schedule. Again, a lot more meaty than the very lazy strength of schedule analysis, if I can even use that word, that you get in the mainstream media. We will get into the meat of it. The teams that have the easiest and hardest offensive and defensive schedules in the NFL coming up in 2017. Again, no season win totals numbers are out. That should not be an excuse for you not to be making your projections for when they do come out. Warren will give you all the insight you need coming up where sports betting analytics lives on a numbers game at VSiN. Back on a numbers game here at VSiN, the Vegas Stats and Information Network. Gil Alexander, again, Brent Musburger. My guy's in the desert. He's got the day off. Ron Flatter in for Brent today on Tuesday. We are here with Warren Sharp, though, advanced NFL analyst, advanced stats, that is, the best in the biz for my money. And while Vegas is lollygagging on the season win totals, we don't have to wait for them. Let's do the analysis on a schedule the right way. Warren is here to help us out with that. So, Warren, the 5 easiest offensive schedules heading into next season. What you got?
Well, the first one is a team that I think let a lot of people down last year. Some people could have predicted it, but the Carolina Panthers, coming off the Super Bowl appearance that they lost to the Denver Broncos, they had a miserable season last year. But obviously, they played a first-place schedule last year, last year. Now they finish in 4th place in the NFC South, so they get a last-place schedule. And fortunately for them, they get the 3rd easiest schedule of opposing pass defenses, and very important, the 24th rated schedule of opposing pass rushes. We saw Cam Newton have a ton of trouble last season behind that offensive line, got beat up a ton. He's going to be facing far easier pass rushes coming into his face this year with easier pass defenses behind them. So it should help that offense overall maintain some consistency. They do have a difficult stretch. I want to say it's weeks 6 through 10, where they face a number of more decent pass defenses. However, that coincides nicely with easier run defenses, so they should be able to rely a little bit more on the run game there. But overall, by far, the number 1 easiest schedule of opposing defenses this upcoming year.
And what's doubly interesting about this, and you do a great job of pointing this out, you have a piece at Roto World right now that outlines all of this. It really does have a fantasy implication as well, both in terms of the hard stretches and the easier stretches that you just described. But a guy like Cam Newton, just based on that alone, probably not a bad value draft pick in your season-long NFL fantasy draft. And certainly from a DFS perspective, based on what you just said, we know to stay away from him perhaps weeks 6 through 10. So really, not only from a betting standpoint with season win totals and futures, but also great fantasy application as well.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful over at Sharp Football Stats. You can look at the weekly schedule visualized based upon opponent strengths. And so you can see the weeks that you might want to target somebody or steer clear of them. There's a number of games and teams where they play a really hard defense followed by a really easy one. And that's where, like, if you are a DFS fan, that's when you might want to get involved when the ownership level is a lot lower following a bad performance probably against a more difficult defense. Speaking of a difficult season last year, the Minnesota Vikings clock in as the number 2 easiest offensive schedule. They played the most difficult pass rushes last year and had the most injured offensive line in terms of games lost by their offensive linemen. That's a terrible combination when we're talking about the efficiency that's required out of the passing game, 4 times more correlated to wins than rushing. If you're dealing with tough pass rushes and your offensive line is completely beat up, you're of course not going to have a lot of success. They face this year the number 1 easiest schedule of opposing pass defenses, and I think there's plenty of opportunities there. If you're talking about fantasy, a guy like Adam Thielen, who's being drafted pretty late, I think offers a lot of upside. But I think the Minnesota Vikings offer a lot. They also play a very difficult schedule of opposing offenses. So it's a good opportunity that offense is going to have to be somewhat high-powered to make up for points being scored against their defense.
So again, these are the 5 easiest offensive schedules, the 5 easiest schedules from an offensive standpoint headed into 2017 by the analytics of Warren Sharp. Again, sharpfootballstats.com, one of his websites where you can see all of this stuff, not only in the offseason, but during the season, just brilliantly from a visual standpoint as well. So Carolina catching a lot of breaks from an offensive standpoint next year. Minnesota as well. What other teams round out the top 5 of easiest offensive schedules?
Yeah, so the top 5, we'll conclude the top 5 with the Baltimore Ravens. And this one scares me a little bit. They've got the 3rd easiest overall schedule, but they faced the 5th easiest schedule of pass defenses last year. They have the 3rd easiest schedule this year, but they were really bad last year, as we all know. Joe Flacco, a terrible season against a very easy schedule. So they may have to lean a little bit more on the run game. I think the run game, they don't play a single run defense ranked better than 10th. So that's a decent chance for them to lean a little bit more on the run game. and hopefully the offense comes around a little bit. But they do have an overall pretty easy schedule. A team I'm really fascinated with clocks in at number 4, and that's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They played the 12th hardest schedule of pass defenses last year. That drops down to 26th this year. They face the 6th easiest schedule of explosive pass defenses, and they bring into the fold Deshaun Jackson from the Washington Redskins, who is obviously
indeed.
a deep threat no matter where he lines up on the field and what the play is actually called. As long as he's out there, the defense has to adjust for him. It's going to make life a lot easier for Jameis Winston, and I think that there's some big things in store for them. And then I'll conclude the top 5 easiest offenses with the New Orleans Saints. They play a difficult schedule every single season, it seems, but we never really count that against them. We always expect good things, and they still deliver almost on an annual basis. They're going to have to do it without Brandon Cooks this upcoming season. They face a more difficult start, but after the 5th week of the season, from week 6 on to 16, they've faced the easiest schedule of opposing pass defenses the rest of the way.
Well, a couple interesting points about that, just to buttress some of that. I noticed that of those 5 that are the easiest from an offensive standpoint, 3 are NFC South teams, which figures because they play the same teams in the AFC, so there's some correlation in division schedules. But interesting that 3 nonetheless are from that one division. And the point you make, and this coming as a guy who watches every snap of every Washington Redskins game for my entire life, the Deshaun Jackson point cannot be overstated. I mean, and again, with the Redskins offense, it is a bit of chicken and egg, right? You don't know. Is Deshaun opening the offense for Kirk Cousins? Is Jordan Reed the guy opening it up for Deshaun and Kirk? The point being that Deshaun spreads the field no matter what, and he is going to help Jameis Winston. I couldn't agree with that more. Good for the Bucks, and I would imagine really bad for the Redskins.
Yeah, and the Redskins face the most difficult schedule of opposing defenses this upcoming season, and they're going to have to do it without Deshaun. And I will tell you, I did an analysis throwing the ball deep down the right side of the field. Kirk Cousins really had very little success throwing the ball in that direction to anybody other than Deshaun Jackson over his career, his couple seasons in D.C. And Jameis has struggled throwing the ball deep to the right as well. So I think it's going to be a nice pairing bringing him down to Tampa. But yes, your Washington Redskins, the most difficult schedule of opposing defenses. Unfortunately, they played a very difficult schedule last season as well, and they produced great numbers. Sometimes we do see these teams where I think it's easier for a great offense to perform against a very difficult schedule than it is the reverse, where you have a bad offense, trying to perform against an easy schedule. I'd rather have the good offense playing a difficult schedule, and they could still see some things. We saw the Atlanta Falcons last year, the number 2 hardest schedule in the NFL last year, still produced the number 1 overall offensive metrics. You've seen the New England Patriots do similar as well.
So the Redskins with the hardest schedule from an offensive standpoint next year. What are the other 4 in the bottom 5 that have this horrible distinction heading into 2017?
Yeah, so we'll round them out real quick here. We've got the 49ers. They faced a brutal schedule last year. They got a new coach in Kyle Shanahan, but they've got the 2nd hardest schedule this year. We've got the Oakland Raiders. They clock in tied for 30th overall, so it means they're tied for the 3rd hardest schedule. And the Dallas Cowboys are tied with them. 2 teams with very good offenses last year, but they're going to be challenged and tested a lot this year. I think Dallas had a bigger edges last year with their schedule and the newness of some of the pieces that people were underestimating them. They'll get tested a lot more this upcoming season. And then clocking in with the 5th hardest schedule is the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's just a difficult one to factor in because we don't really have high expectations, generally speaking, for Andy Reid and the Chiefs. So it's going to be difficult against this schedule, but they're always a decent team year in and year out, it seems. So probably another decent team this year, but it's going to be difficult to really excel against that strong schedule.
Yeah, and you alluded to this briefly, just by memory. Didn't Dallas have like the easiest schedule against defenses last year? One of the top easiest ones?
Yeah, Dallas. Well, Dallas actually their offense played a more difficult schedule. It was estimated heading into the season that they were going to face a very easy schedule. But as it turned out, the Giants defense was a lot better than what we thought it was. And the Eagles defense was a lot better than what we thought it was heading into the season. And so they ended up playing a slightly more difficult schedule than we thought heading into the year.
Yeah, and you make a great point. These things are dynamic, It's so funny. These are how it stands now. It's funny how when not only do they talk about strength of schedule and do so based on just the laziest, basis for doing it, and for talking about strength of schedule headed into any NFL season, the mainstream media I'm talking about. But then you make the great point. Then they just stop talking about it entirely once the season starts. And these things are a dynamic thing that shift. So now let's just review those once again. The 5 most difficult schedules from an offensive standpoint headed into next year. Most difficult now. The Redskins, the Niners, the Raiders, the Cowboys, and the Chiefs. So again, whatever your projections are from a handicapping standpoint on these teams, whatever the season win total number ultimately is when Vegas chooses to release those, keep that in mind, that those are teams that you might want to just downgrade somewhat because of the nature of their opponents defensively. On the other hand, and what Warren talked about earlier, Carolina's got the easiest schedule from an offensive standpoint. Minnesota, Baltimore, Tampa Bay, and New Orleans on the 5 easy list in terms of facing opposing defenses. So from an offensive standpoint, they've got the easiest go of it. Are you ready to do the other side of the ball this week, Warren, or should we save that for next week?
We could do whatever you'd like. We could come back and rehash it next week or try to barrel through it right now. It's up to you.
If you're ready to go, we're going to do it right after the break. We'll take it from the opposite side of the ball. What are the easiest and most difficult defensive schedules coming up in the NFL? Warren Sharp from Sharp Football Stats. Next, more with him on A Numbers Game exclusively here at VSiN. Back on A Numbers Game here at VSiN. By the way, baseball full slate coming up, as Brett Lawson just mentioned. Madison Bumgarner has spoken up about his dirt bike accident that got him on the DL. Quote, not the most responsible decision I've ever made, unquote, for Madison Bumgarner. Understatement of the year. Back with Warren Sharp from SharpFootballAnalysis.com, also from SharpFootballStats.com. Again, if you missed it, Warren doing strength of schedule for the NFL via real analytics, not a lazy analysis. And again, the 5 easiest schedules from an offensive perspective. He talked about Carolina, Minnesota, Baltimore, Tampa Bay, and New Orleans. Nice to know that Adrian Peterson, with that $3.5 million contract with the Saints announced today, lands on his feet, from the perspective of getting to face easier defenses. And then the most difficult from an offensive perspective, meaning facing the most difficult defenses, Washington, San Francisco, Oakland, Dallas, and Kansas City. Now, from the other side of the ball, Warren, what you got is the 5 easiest defensive schedules.
Yeah, so fortunately, the fans of Indianapolis Colts, who, their defense has been the problem. They've got Andrew Luck. They need better protection for him. But generally speaking, that defense, especially the way that Grigson was acquiring players, defensive players on the via free agency, overspending, and those types of things, that's out the door. And this upcoming season, they actually face the easiest schedule of opposing defenses. And you'll catch a kind of a trend. 3 AFC South teams have the easiest schedule of opposing defenses. And then we're going to roll into a couple of NFC West teams. So this actually makes a lot of sense when you think about, the caliber of those divisions. We're playing 6 games. Each team plays the other teams twice. So that's 6 games in their division on an annual basis. That's going to weigh in a lot more than, playing this division or that division elsewhere, and you're playing 4 games or sometimes less than that. So the Indianapolis Colts, pretty much across the board, whether it's passing or rushing, they're going to have a pretty easy go of it. And a lot of the reason for that is they're getting rid of games against, the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions, who they had to play last year, and the San Diego Chargers and the Oakland Raiders, introducing games against teams like Cleveland and Baltimore and the Rams and the 49ers. So all those things definitely made their schedule a lot easier this upcoming year.
And just to clarify, we're talking now from the perspective of their defense having to play opposing offenses, correct?
Exactly. So the Indianapolis Colts defense is going to have a better chance of performing well and keeping them in games against the likes of Cleveland and the Rams and the 49ers than they were last year when they were playing offenses like Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford and Derek Carr and the like. So I think they're going to have a much easier time this upcoming year. The Tennessee Titans clocked in as having the second easiest schedule for their own defense. So they're playing the second easiest offenses this upcoming year. Again, whether it's rush or pass, they actually face the second easiest schedule, regardless of those two metrics that you choose. They will face some offenses that were a little bit more explosive in nature. They will be playing like the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Arizona Cardinals, teams that can be a little bit more explosive, but overall the efficiency of their schedule this upcoming season gives them the second easiest schedule, and that's going to be helpful for a team, especially with Marcus Mariota trying to develop as we consider things on both sides of the ball here. When you're playing easy offenses, when your defense gets to possibly get off the field more often, they're playing easier offenses, that's going to give you as an offense, the Tennessee Titans offense, a lot more opportunities. And so Marcus Mariota at this stage of his career could really use that extra work. It could really help that offense a lot this upcoming season, that their defense is going to have a far easier time.
Okay, Colts and Titans catching the breaks from that side of the ball. What other three teams round out the top five there?
Yeah, the last couple of teams, we've got the Jacksonville Jaguars, another AFC South team.
Wow.
They actually play the worst pass rushes, and this is a defense that's supposed to be coming along. So the worst, I mean, pass protection. So their pass rush might have a lot of success this upcoming season, and that defense is coming to its own, a stronger defense probably than what the Titans and the Colts have. Then you've got the San Francisco 49ers. We know that they're playing the second hardest schedule of opposing offenses, but they're of opposing defenses rather, but their defense is going to go up, fortunately for them, against some pretty poor offenses. And then to round it out is the Arizona Cardinals, whose defense faced the fifth easiest schedule of opposing offenses, another team who has a very strong defense. So I think you're going to see it the most probably with the Cardinals and the Jaguars, that these two defenses are going to have a lot more success. The Colts and the 49ers, on that side of the ball, they're still a work in progress.
I think the Cardinals is the most interesting of that bunch, though, Warren, as you intimate, because bad year last year. Let's not beat around the bush about that. But they have the components in place with David Johnson, of course, leading the way, as all fantasy owners of David Johnson can attest. But if Carson Palmer can sort of return at least somewhat and buck the age curve to a guy who can get the ball in the hands of his receivers, that is a very fortuitous schedule for the Cardinals to have to face. I think that's one that sort of I'm making a mental note about when approaching season win totals. What about the 5 most difficult defensive schedules?
Yeah, and just one real quick on that Cardinals. They play 2 straight road games to start the season in domes, at Detroit, at Indianapolis. Good offenses there. Then they host the Dallas Cowboys. So those are 3 good offenses that they're going up against. But then they're going to play a litany of very poor offenses, particularly passing offenses. And the few that they do play that are good, they get them at home. Tampa Bay's potentials, Seattle, and Tennessee. All 3 of those games up through week 14, those are their hardest opponents after week 3, and every single one of those is a home game. The teams that have the most difficult schedule of opposing offenses this upcoming season, we start with the Denver Broncos, one of the best defenses out there. They're going to have to battle with some tremendously strong opposing offenses, really test their defense. They play, it doesn't matter, pass or rush. They've got the number 1 overall pass efficiency offenses they're going up against, and the number 2 overall rush efficiency offenses that they're going up against. The Carolina Panthers, they clock in as number 2, which is why they're an interesting team to look at possibly for, their point totals, the game totals on these games, because they play an easy schedule for their offense, but their defense plays a very difficult schedule of offenses. So there should be a lot of offense in the Carolina Panthers games this upcoming season. They face the number 2 hardest schedule of opposing offenses. And I'll just go ahead and round out the top 5 so that we can discuss them if you want. But we got the New York Jets checking in as the defense that plays the 3rd most difficult schedule of offenses. A lot of people have high expectations about the Jets from years past, but this Jets team is really depleted of a lot of talent. And then you got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Minnesota Vikings, 2 teams that we discussed that have very easy offensive schedules like the Carolina Panthers. So the Bucs and the Vikings could have some more exciting games this upcoming season, in terms of they're going up against some very good offenses, and they themselves are going to go up against some easier defenses.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a handful of teams in all those, Bucs, Vikings, Niners. I want to say the Panthers was another one you mentioned that looked real good on one side of the ball schedule-wise, but not so good on the other side. So we didn't get any team, let's put it this way, we didn't get any team that worked out either to the good or to the bad both offensively and defensively. This stuff is fascinating, Warren. And again, for those who, again, would like to watch that again, this will be archived at VSiN.com. And that applies to all your stuff, Warren. This piece will have and already does have from one side of the ball, a black and white copy equivalent on rotoworld.com. You've got all your stuff over at sharpfootballstats.com. Just a great reference material. And, of course, what has been your bread and butter, your NFL preview guide, when is that coming out this year? Are you doing it earlier than normal?
It is earlier. It's going to come out in late June, maybe by the third week in June.
Wow.
And I'm really excited about it. I've already done the layouts for all the pages. I've been working on this thing for a couple of months now. And it's my baby. I started it literally like 2 months ago. And I'm going to be working up until that time. And I can't wait. It's going to blow the doors off of what I did last year. And I'm really excited. A lot of people are going to learn some good information from it.
Yeah. And, side note, I'll close on this. Side note, you also, just from a non-betting standpoint, you talk about roster construction better than anybody that I know. And this is why I tell you off air all the time, why aren't you working for an NFL team by now? But really gives great insights into how teams are able to get to the playoffs and win Super Bowls. How the Seattle Seahawks did it by roster construction and on down the line through 32 NFL teams. The great Warren Sharp, again, on Twitter at SharpFootball, SharpFootballStats.com, SharpFootballAnalysis.com. Warren, love you. We'll have you back, of course. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gil.
All right, Warren Sharp, best in the biz. Gil Alexander, a numbers game here at VSiN. And before my guys in the desert, once again, contractual obligation to get through every single game on the MLB schedule. Mikey, we got 15 to do in 10 minutes.
All right,
you
let's
ready?
hurry.
It's next on a numbers game at VSiN.